Yo ho ho, welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me today. As always, I hope you're keeping well. So I'm going to be talking you through a couple of books that I've read in the last couple of months. I'm doing my September and October reading wrap up today, and I want to kind of get back into doing wrap ups and, discussing the books that I've read rather than just solely discussing books I haven't read and not really discussing them, giving you my best approximation of them. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into the books that I read in September. So the first book that I read in September was a library book called Fish Swimming in Dappled Sunlight. This was like a thriller / crime novel. It's really short. I'd seen it doing the rounds on TikTok, and I'm really into reading Japanese literature. I feel like Japanese authors really excel at writing thrillers and horror and all that sort of thing. So the story follows a couple who are in the process of breaking up, and they're actually spending their last night together in their apartment before parting ways for good the next morning. And the reason why their relationship is broken down is because they both believe that the other one is responsible for the death of a man a few months prior. Going through both their perspectives, both their recollections, and you're really trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of what actually happened. And the whole time I was reading this, it felt very claustrophobic, it felt very intimate, it felt very uncomfortable at times. Like I shouldn't be there, I shouldn't be witnessing this very kind of personal breakdown and seeing this relationship dynamic really fall apart. But there is a very prominent revelation quite early on in the book, so much so that I thought it was just my own dirty mind making things up, and I literally had to reread a segment. The novel really did just peak there. The rest of it I couldn't really care for. I found that it was very drawn out, and by the time it got to the actual ending and revealing the true events of that happened on that night, I wasn't super invested anymore as I had been initially, so I was let down by this. I feel like if certain elements of the story hadn't been revealed too early, I would have been eager to continue reading it, but unfortunately it really did just peak and then fizzle out by the end of it. The next book that I read was one that I had tried reading previously and didn't really gel well with the writing style, and I did finally finish it, but I have a lot of thoughts on it, and I feel like it's going to be a little bit controversial because so many people love this book. It's The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So I felt very out of my element while reading this book. There were certain moments in it that I felt incredibly uncomfortable reading. This book is a retelling of Homer's Odyssey, and it focuses on the character of Patroclus. Patroclus is originally lined up to be a suitor of Helen of Troy, but unfortunately shit doesn't really pan out for him, and he ends up being exiled. And in his exile, he meets Achilles. And initially their friendship isn't really existent. Like, Patroclus is often left by himself. He's not considered a great warrior or anything like that. He doesn't really fit in. And then at a certain point, Achilles takes him under his wing, kind of out of pity initially, but then the two develop a great bond. But I had so many issues when reading this book, and I've never really flip-flopped as much as I have when reading this. Like, initially I was like, I don't like this, and then something would happen, I was like, okay, I can get behind this, like, this isn't too bad, I'm enjoying this, and then I'd go back to, oh, I'm hating this is making me super uncomfortable. For example, the initial scene where Patroclus and Achilles kind of get together in a romantic way, they are pretty young. I'm pretty sure they're 15 or 16, and I just felt like doing this the whole time that I was reading it. I was like, oh god, let's skim. My main issue with the writing of this book is that I found it incredibly repetitive. Now, maybe it is geared towards younger readers who wouldn't really pick up on that, but I just felt like we were being hit over the head with the same metaphors time and time again, and it felt incredibly redundant. One of these things is every time that we met with Achilles' mother, at least the first 3 times, was that her lips were described as being blood red, and there would be different analogies as to what type of red, how intense the red was. It was as red as blood, it was as red as this and that. And I was like, okay, we get it. She can rock a red lip. Like, why do we have to hear this 3 times? I remember from the first time that we met her that that's kind of how she looks. Maybe go on to something else about her that's unique. I also found that the writing of Achilles and Patroclus' relationship to be incredibly shallow at times, especially on Patroclus' side of things. He was very much interested in Achilles based on his physical attraction to him, and there's a lot of descriptions of Achilles and how beautiful he is and this and that. And as we go through the years of their time together, you really start to see the relationship break down as they get irritated with one another. And you discover that, like, okay, Patroclus doesn't really know that much about the inner workings of Achilles' mind, because he is just so kind of starstruck by him. He has kind of fabricated everything about him in his own mind, and at least that's how it came across to me at times when reading this. However, I did really enjoy kind of the historical element of it. I really enjoyed some of the battle sequences. I enjoyed the build-up during the war. So that's why I felt like this book was like a strong 3.5. Next, I read one of my most anticipated books, which was Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I loved this book. This book did not disappoint, and I was so happy to read it and just to be completely astonished by it and so moved by it, because it's such a beautifully written story at certain points that I just would get choked up reading certain segments and certain paragraphs. So this follows a married couple, Miri and Leah has returned from a deep sea mission. Basically, she was down beneath the sea for several months and wasn't expected to make it back alive because something catastrophic happened on board. And we see Leah's perspective from when she was down there versus when she's back with her wife. And it's really exploring the dynamic in their relationship when Mary thought that her wife had died. She'd gone through the whole process of mourning her, and then she suddenly returns, but she's not really herself. She's not the person that she initially fell in love with, and there's these beautiful moments of alienation and loneliness within this book. Even though that you have the person, you know, your person with you, you can still feel utterly alone. And there are just such intense moments of sadness within this. It was just really beautiful in the way it wrapped things up and the way that it dealt with the certain themes that it did. I just was completely blown away by this novel. It was just absolutely gripping and spellbinding, and immediately I wanted to read more Julia Armfield, and I ended up picking Salt Slow up from the library there like last month, and that also didn't disappoint. It's like, if you enjoyed this and you want more of this, definitely pick up her short story collection. So if you're looking for something that has a bit of sci-fi thriller elements, a little bit of the unknown mixed in with an absolutely spectacularly dissected relationship of these two women and how much they love each other at the end of the day, this is definitely one to check out, because it really did just leave me with my jaw on the floor. The next book that I read was Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. So this is a novella that I had my eye on for quite some time, as it follows a mother and daughter relationship. And it's told from the perspective of the daughter as they're going on a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Japan to travel around Tokyo and some of the smaller towns that Japan has to offer. And the intentions of this trip is that the daughter really just yearns to have a much deeper connection with her mother. Basically, it's kind of one of those relationships where it's a mother-daughter relationship. It's not my mum is my best friend sort of relationship. It kind of just explores the daughter's own discontent with this relationship. And even though it is a novella, it is a little bit dense, as the story really just documents moment by moment everything that they experience on this trip. Even though this is the type of book that I would usually love, I did feel by the time I got to the end of it somewhat dissatisfied with the daughter herself in trying to understand what it is she was actually yearning for, because it really did come across to me as, you have this great relationship with your mother, and sure, it might not live up to the expectations that you have, or it might not be, you know, similar to other people's relationships that they have with their mother, but at least you have it, you know what I mean? It came off as like she just didn't really appreciate what she had. I enjoyed this book for what it was, but it really didn't capture my imagination by the end of it, and I haven't really thought about it much since putting it down. Then I read T. Kingfisher's The Twisted Ones. This is the first time that I read anything by this author. So this follows our main character, Mouse, who is tasked with cleaning out her grandmother's house. And her grandmother was a bit of a hoarder. She also had a step-grandfather who died a couple of years previously, so she really doesn't know what to expect when driving out to this house, which is basically in the middle of nowhere in this forest. As Mouse is there and she starts shifting through various different items within the house and paperwork, she comes across journals from her step-grandfather, and it really does come across as he was having some sort of mental breakdown. He was having a descent into madness because he's documenting these things that are referred to as the Twisted Ones, and just talking about the forest and talking about certain stones that are in the forest. And it really kind of gives Mouse the heebie-jeebies, and luckily there are some neighbours nearby that she can talk to about these things, but she starts having weird experiences too. This was a really fun read for me. I liked the element of folk horror within it, even though I didn't find it super scary or anything like that. After like the midway section of the book, it does kind of turn more into like a thriller rather than like a horror novel, but I didn't really have any issues with that because I still found it very engaging. I was still very invested in Mouse and figuring out what it was that was going on, what had happened to her step-grandfather. If you're interested in Kingfisher, check it out. Next, I read The Ghost Seer by Friedrich Schiller. So this is a book that I found in a charity shop a couple of months ago, and it caught my interest because of the title, and I started reading the back and I realised it was blurbed by Thomas de Quincey, and I was like, oh, this is an old book then, because if Thomas de Quincey read it, that means that it was, you know, out at the time that he was around. I decided to pick it up. I knew nothing about it, and going into it, I wish I had kind of done a little bit more research, because unfortunately this text was never finished and it very much comes across like that. So it's split into book 1 and book 2, and the main story is that it's kind of like a con artist story. It is meant to be a gothic horror tale, but I found it very, very light on the gothic horror. And then the latter half of the book, or book 2, is written in an epistolary format between two men. I found it hard to keep up with these letters and why their letters were relevant to each other, and kind of forgetting what it is that they were talking about. But initially I thought the first half of the book, book 1, was pretty interesting as it focuses on a seance. And it's basically kind of like a seance gone wrong, because it's set up by a con man, and he's just expecting this is going to be, you know, a good way to earn a few coins from these rich aristocrats. And then during the seance, an actual ghost does appear, and he tries to explain it all away. He tries to admit, you know, that he was just trying to con them and all that sort of thing. And I thought that was quite interesting, but aside from that, it didn't really go anywhere. Then I picked up 19 Claws and a Blackbird by Ausgustina Bazterrica, and this is the author who wrote Tender as the Flesh. Now, I will say right off the bat, if you read Tender as the Flesh and you're expecting more of the same from the short story collection, you were going to be severely disappointed. This short story collection kind of focuses more so on women and mental health, and there's a lot of really out there metaphors within it that I think it would be kind of difficult for someone who may not really be expecting that to be the main subject matter. And it might be a little bit confusing or just a little bit odd for people who are reading it, because I haven't seen great reviews of this. And that's why I wanted to pick it up so much. I found it to be quite effective, and I didn't really see the issues that I'd been seeing popping up on Goodreads and what people had been saying about this and stuff like that, because this is going to sound really bad. I found it at times kind of relatable, and maybe that's because I have like mental illness issues myself, and I've had like more extreme moments based on that. At times I was like, yeah, like it is what it is, like. This wasn't an absolutely standout collection though. I feel like maybe there was like 2 main stories in this that I did really enjoy and that I would go back to reread, but overall I found it to be quite weak. And like I said, there's no aspects on cannibalism or any of that kind of good societal sort of stuff that Tender as the Flesh really had to offer. But I still enjoyed it for what it was. The next book I picked up was The Guest Cat, and I picked it up purely because it's a Japanese translation that features a cat very prominently, and I figured I'll probably enjoy this. And again, unfortunately, I was somewhat let down by this. So it follows the story of a young married couple who are both working from home as freelance writers, but they don't really have much to talk about themselves anymore, and their relationship is somewhat staled. And then one day a cat comes in through their kitchen window and kind of turns their life around, because this cat just starts visiting every single day. And it really, really revitalizes their relationship and how they talk to one another and how they just start to enjoy life again together because of this cat. And it's like so sweet and so wholesome. But something happened as I was halfway through this novel, something very much unprecedented, and it ended up making me not really like the latter half of the novel. Again, it's just a novella, it's very, very short, but I just, I was so annoyed. And just because it didn't go my way, I was just kind of like miffed about it. This is specifically set in a small little cottage, and it had that really kind of like intimate, cozy element to it. But it isn't a book that I would say would be super memorable for me personally. Then getting into the books that I read in October, the first one was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. I have to say it did not disappoint. This was incredible. Even though it was a completely sort of desolate sort of read, I just enjoyed the acceptance that the characters had for their situation. There's 40 women who are kept in this underground bunker. They're in a massive cage. They have no recollection as to how they got there, why they're there. They have no idea really how long they've been there, aside from the fact that they're using the youngest member of the group to kind of estimate age, because they're watching her aging process as she's very much like a young teenager when she is put in with them, and they're watching her kind of grow. So they have a slight approximation of time passing, until one day when the guards that are watching them suddenly disappear. It seems like there's a mass evacuation because there's some sort of emergency. And the women don't really know much about these guards because they're not permitted to talk to them. And the novel sets out from there as the cage fails and they're able to actually get out. But all they have is each other to rely on and, you know, utilize the skills that they have, that they've learned, in hopes that they can finally go home or just make sense of the situation that they're in. It was a book that I found that I could really visualize in my mind, so much so that when I'd wake up after reading it the night before, I would be thinking about it, but thinking about it as if like it was a TV show that I was, you know, replaying in my mind, and I'd have to remind myself, no, that's the book I'm currently reading, you know. So I was very, very invested in it. I'm a fan of like the kind of apocalyptic sort of genre. I'm a fan of sci-fi, and this had like all those sorts of elements in it, but really well done. And I could just really appreciate the book for what it was. So yeah, definitely check it out. If you have been meaning to read this for a while, do. Then getting into some of the spookier books that I read in October was Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. This was fantastic. So this is about Mary, who's in her middle age. She's starting to go through the change, and she's also been recently let go from her job in New York. And to fall in line with that sort of time frame, she gets a call to inform her that her aunt in her hometown has become very, very sick, and she needs someone for a time to look after her. And then when she gets back to her hometown, even though she has all these anxieties about it because she was very much the odd one out when she was younger, she was very much bullied, and she still has a lot of animosity for the people who bullied her, and, you know, still holds grudges based on what she experienced as a child and as a teenager in this town. And when she gets there, she realizes that her aunt has somewhat sandbagged her. She basically is a very difficult woman to take care of. And, you know, she's very much herself and very much unapologetic for being who she is. You know, she was one of my favorite characters reading this. But Mary's kind of like overwhelmed with the situation. And as she's someone who's kind of, you know, suffering through menopause and all that sort of thing, she starts having these really weird visions while she looks in the mirror. She basically like witnesses her face start to decay and stuff, so she avoids mirrors at all costs. She starts having visions of murdered women from the town, and for some reason these murdered women are just gravitating towards her as if they want to tell her something and can like help figure out what's going on in this town and stuff. And then it just takes a turn from there. This was such a fun read. If you love horror, if you love a little bit of gore and stuff, if you're wanting moments where you're going to be completely shocked by certain revelations and stuff, this is definitely one to pick up. I just thought it was fantastic, and I'm definitely going to be reading more from this author in the future. The next book that I picked up was Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. So I'd seen this doing the rounds on Instagram and Horror Book Talk and all that sort of thing, and based on the fact that it was compared to a lot of other horror books that I have previously enjoyed, I thought it was going to be something that would be very much worth my time and something that I definitely needed to check out. So our main character is a trans woman named Alice, and she's really struggling in her life. She's resorting a lot to alcohol. She is having really bad difficulties with maintaining certain relationships with friends. And she's having these weird sort of hallucinations at night at home while she's lying in bed, and witnessing a lead singer come out of a poster at night in a very sort of threatening way. And I thought that was hilarious. Like who the singer is, it's Morrissey. She's got a poster of the Smiths up and it's Morrissey she's been haunted by. The reason why Alice is really struggling at the moment is because a year previously she and her two friends entered this abandoned house, and only two of them were able to leave. And while she was there, she was the victim of a sexual assault, and just her memories of that night are really all over the place. What I really liked about this book is how well the haunted house aspect was kind of designed, because it's meant to be a manifestation of all the sort of hatred that happens primarily in the United Kingdom. It's like a manifestation of all the hatred and bigotry and prejudice and all that sort of thing, so that when you go into the house, you're very much manipulated by it, and those are the elements that it's going to be playing on your mind while you're there. And there's so much trauma that she has to unpack, like not just from that night but also from her past. And like it's a really kind of like gritty novel in that aspect of like what it explores and how deep it goes into like the human psyche and stuff. I have to be honest, like as much as I loved the house aspect and what that represented, I absolutely hated the ending. I feel like there was no reason to do that to a certain character who was in the book. It didn't make sense aside from one previous reference, and that if that was all we had to go on as to how this character turned out, I thought it was incredibly vulgar. It didn't feel genuine, and it felt like the author was just kind of trying to wrap everything up with a pretty bow and then make it like meaningful and stuff like that and powerful. And it really didn't come across that way to me. And then finally, the last book that I ended up reading in October was The Creeper by A.M. Shine. So this was a really anticipated book for me again, because I'd read this author's first book earlier in the year, The Watchers, really enjoyed that. And I was just kind of hoping for more of the same. And even though I felt like this book, basically because of the plot, I felt like it would play well with like a younger audience. Like for example, if this was turned into a film, I could very much see it being like aimed at like 15 or 16-year-olds or whatever, but that definitely didn't take away from my own personal enjoyment. So the story follows Dr. Sparling, who is a reclusive academic, and he hires two people right out of university in order to do some field research for a project that he's working on. So he tasks them with going to this really remote village in the middle of nowhere called Tirmalach, and that is kind of funny to me because it translates to like cursed land or a land of the cursed. So I was like, I like that little reference there. So Ben and Chloe are the lucky participants in this research, and they go out to Tirmalach, and basically they're just met with these villagers who are very cold towards them. They don't want them there. They tell them you never should have come here. It turns out it's going to be much more difficult for them to get the research done because no one wants to talk to them, aside from a little girl who lets them in on local folklore. And they learn that the village goes into a lockdown basically every night just before it's about to get dark, and not to be looking out your windows, not to be outside or anything like that. And it's all because of this character, the Creeper. And if you look outside, you'll see him far, far off in the distance. And then the next night, if you're caught out again, you'll see him, but he'll be a bit closer to you. And then on the third night, he'll be right outside your window. I just thought the idea of the Creeper and what he specifically looks like, I just thought that was so fun. I could really envision it in my mind. And the way Ben and Chloe end up kind of being in this super paranoid state after visiting this village and kind of getting fuck all from the villagers and stuff, and not really seeing the purpose of their research for Dr. Sparling. I thought this was a great read. I just breezed through it. It was definitely something that was able to kind of get me a little bit creeped out, and I just really enjoyed reading this over Halloween, which was like the perfect time to pick it up. So those are all the books that I read in September and October, and I'm going to be posting my November and December wrap up at the end of this month, or just at the very start of January. I am still recovering from like an upper respiratory illness, so I'm sorry that I was sounding continuously more and more congested as this video went on. I didn't want to wait around until I was like 100% better, because Lord knows how long I'd be waiting for that, and I just really miss making videos. And now that I have kind of more time freed up at the moment, I'm just, I'm looking forward to getting back into it and all that sort of thing, especially since this is my favorite time of year for making content. I love all the wrap-ups and like the yearly wrap-ups and stuff like that. And yes, I have hit my reading goal of reading 50 books so far this year, so very, very happy with that. As always, let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts are on them, or if you're planning to read them, or any books that have just been a standout to you over the last couple of weeks, anything that you feel that I need to get on my radar. As always, I love hearing your thoughts. And if you want to follow me outside of YouTube, you can check out my Instagram or my TikTok. And if you haven't done so already, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. And thank you so much for all your support. I really, really appreciate it. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.